Welcome to episode 107 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. Today I am joined by the guy whose motto is "Where beer and battlefields are, there I will also go," Darren Weeks. And I am his co-host, Mary, who managed to make it through that wonderful intro without having to do two takes.
Wow. Beer, battlefields, Battlestar Galactica, the big three. Anyway, what's going on? How are you?
Battlestar Galactica?
Everyone, oh, for God's sakes, never mind. Anyway, what's going on? How are you? That was a great. That intro was pretty much exactly what I expected. Just absolutely par.
So a disaster.
Fantastic. No, it was great as far as you know. So how's everything going? How's your week been so far?
Good. How about you?
Oh, it hasn't been too bad. Friday is on the horizon, so I can't complain. It's beautiful weather here in the great Northeast, so I can't complain too much.
I have to say, now that I'm done like my first year of grad school, I am very thankful I'm getting back into just reading for myself and not something that's been assigned. So I finished Confederates in the Attic, and for anybody that hasn't read that, excellent book. Highly recommend it.
Yes, we very much enjoy that too. Horowitz was fantastic, fantastic. So back in the saddle again, it's just us two. It's been a couple of weeks since we did this with just us, so we're looking forward to this episode, and we're gonna have a lot of fun with this. But well, you're the host, so
I was about to get to it. I didn't want to be rude and interrupt you. What are you drinking?
No, not you.
What mug are you drinking it out of?
Oh, well, thank you so much. I am drinking. It's called Southern Tier from wherever this is from,
New York.
New York, and I'm drinking out of my Spotsylvania Fredericksburg mug because that is appropriate because we're going to be talking about the Battle of Spotsylvania. And but thanks for asking. Anyhow, what about yourself?
I'm drinking Limbo IPA, which is by Long Trail Brewing out of Vermont, and Vermonters are going to figure into, if not this episode, we will be definitely talking about them in part two. And I'm drinking it out of my General Grant mug.
Oh, very good, very good. So he's definitely a big part of this as well. So this is going to be a first of a two-parter. We haven't done a two-parter in a while. No. We're going to do the first one, the first Spotsylvania, the second Spotsylvania 2, the search for Curly's gold, and this will be good because this is a battle that this goes on. It's a long battle and it's a long campaign. You know, the calendar flips to May, and with it, the beginning of the battle season. And, there are several things going on in the Civil War in the spring of 1864, Mary. U.S. Grant, you mentioned him, his Overland Campaign. It's one that has the most impact, probably certainly in the East at this point. Just go back a little bit, May of 1864, war's been going on for 3+ years. And, while the Union Army is gaining traction in that Western theater, Robert E. Lee and his Army of Northern Virginia still loom as the largest threat in the Eastern theater now.
Yeah. Some of it is a little slow, and keep in mind, Spotsylvania, the Overland, which is part of the Overland Campaign, is happening. You have Sherman on his Atlanta campaign as well, so that is happening. So there's two very big things happening at the same time in the Civil War, as well as I think you have Nathaniel Banks down in the Gulf doing stuff down there as well.
There's a lot of moving parts with this. So, to that end, March of 1864, Abraham Lincoln, he's going to mix things up a little bit. He's going to name Ulysses S. Grant, commander of all Union armies. He's going to be raised to the rank of lieutenant general, and he's going to be sent east, and he's going to join the Army of the Potomac with our old friend George Meade. Now, almost immediately when he gets there, Grant is going to draw plans to bring an offensive campaign directly against Robert E. Lee, while his former subordinate, William T. Sherman, like you mentioned, he's doing his thing going towards Atlanta.
Yeah.
Now, this offensive for Grant is going to be called the Overland Campaign. Everybody knows that. Now, the Union Army at this point, Mary, was enormous. It was gigantic. Starting with that campaign with over 120,000 guys, Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia has got almost half of that at about 65,000. And, Lee is going to try, it's going back to the beginning of Overland, he's going to try to basically seize the initiative by attacking Grant in that Battle of the Wilderness, the old Chancellorsville battlefield. Because of the dense forest, it's 70 square miles of just woods and crap. It's going to help offset that numerical advantage. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about the Battle of the Wilderness, but suffice it to say, the Battle of the Wilderness was inconclusive when it ended on May 7th of 1864. But what it did, though, is it signaled a real sea change in Union military strategy. And that's going to prove to be a real game change. Up to this point, the Union Army, their strategy was to try to sack Richmond. And, that's what it was. And after every battle, they would fall back they would rest and eventually try again. What separated this, and it was a real key turning point in the war, was this Grant changed philosophy in two ways. The first thing is, instead of trying to take Richmond, the hell with that, he's going to focus on taking Lee. He's going to target is going to be the army. And the other thing that's going to basically be a big change is they're going to, for the most part, not back off. After every battle, like you said, they fall off. Grant's going to keep coming. And this is going to be a
Yeah.
real big difference. And it's something that's going to really affect when we talk about the Battle of Spotsylvania, no question.
Yeah. And to the thing is, like, Grant tells Meade, wherever Lee goes, there you will also go. So as you said, it's a change. And the other thing too to mention is General Meade is still leading the Army of the Potomac at this time. When Grant came in, like when Grant got, the role that he did, which was commander of all armies, he came to Washington briefly. He did think about commanding from the Western Theater, but he decided to make his base in the East. And there's a lot written about the Grant Meade relationship, but I found this one quote and I think it's important, just to kind of show their relationship. But Meade wrote to his wife after Grant had taken over and said, "Grant is so much more active than his predecessor and agrees so well with me in his views. I cannot but be rejoiced at his arrival, because I believe my success to be that more probable. My duty is plain, to continue quietly to discharge my duties, heartily cooperating with him and under him." And I think Meade knew at that point that, Grant was going to overshadow him, but Meade was a soldier and he's going to continue to fulfill his duties. But Grant definitely plays a large role in this Overland campaign and in what is going to be the Battle of Spotsylvania.
Right. So, Grant has a 2-to-1 man advantage. Lee is still under the impression that Grant wants Richmond. This is gonna go on and on. So what Grant's gonna do is, after these battles, he's gonna basically go around Lee's right into the south with the plan to draw Lee out and play right into Grant's hands. And he knew that Grant was just going to use this war of attrition. He was going to keep swinging and swinging and swinging. Eventually, the numbers are going to tell the story in Grant's head. It's going to be bloody. It's going to be costly. But eventually, it's just a mathematical equation. I mean, you're going to win eventually if you have the stones to do it. So, real quick, Battle of the Wilderness on April 7th, it ends. Lee expects Grant, like we said, to, just like all of his predecessors have, is to fall back.
Yeah.
Grant's going to move around to the left and try to go south, and he's going to head to a small village called Spotsylvania Courthouse. Now, it doesn't have a lot of strategic value, but like Gettysburg, it's got a lot of roads. So if you take Spotsylvania Courthouse, you're going to be able to concentrate your army, because his army is gigantic and there's not a lot of roads in that wilderness area of Virginia. So he needs a town that he can basically blow the conch shell and have his men travel on those roads. And if you are going to attack Richmond, you have to kind of have it because it's close and it has that road network.
Yeah.
Now, Lee sees this, and suddenly he discovers that Grant ain't falling back. Something strange afoot at the Circle K, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a whole new, it's kind of, I think, in a way, Lee had become accustomed to what other Army of Potomac commanders, had, but now he's got Grant, who's coming from the Western Theater, where the war is. I mean, I don't want to say it's a little bit more rougher. It's a little bit more Wild West out there. Grant's a different style of commander than I think what Lee has encountered so far. Last time Lee and Grant had encountered each other, I think, was in the Mexican War, right?
It was a long time. Lee's going to realize this, and then he's going to look at the map and he's going to go, "Oh crap, he's going for Spotsylvania Courthouse. I better get there before he does." So basically, what happens is the race is on. Now Lee knows he doesn't have the manpower to stop Grant, but what he does have an advantage is that road network and the terrain are going to slow Grant down. Grant's army, like I said, is really big. There aren't enough adequate roads to move them all, so they're going to be slow. It's just going to take them forever.
I think Grant kind of was accustomed to, Sherman was pretty quick at moving his armies, and they were pretty quick out in the Western Theater. And, I don't think he realized how much Meade would get bogged down in the wilderness, and he's like a day behind. And I don't think Grant was disappointed. It was just one of those things where it's like Meade's like, well, I can't go any further, so we have to stop. Like, we're getting bogged down by everything. Like, because can you imagine moving like the horses with the artillery, for anybody who's been to the wilderness, like that would be terrible to have to do that. And it would definitely slow you down. And not to mention
They
the
say,
weather. It's hot. It's hot as hell right now.
well, they say for every 10,000 men, you need 30 miles of road when you
Yeah.
factor in men and artillery and all that. Now, what Lee's going to do is the roads aren't going to be any faster for him. There's no express lane here for him. So he has the same issue. He's going to send his fastest troops to try to beat and block Grant to get to Spotsylvania. And that's going to be, of course, his cavalry under Jeb Stuart. Now, Grant knows what Lee's up to. He knows he's going to use his cavalry. So what he's going to do is basically he is going to have his cavalry chief, of course, the great Phil Sheridan, sarcastically. He's going to use little Phil to take his cavalry and basically clear the road. They're going to, for the most part, go down road grade down the road and clear out Jeb's cavalry for the infantry so they can proceed to Spotsylvania. Now, there's going to be a problem, Mary. There's a problem here in Spotsylvania, right?
Shocker.
And that is there is a mutual hatred that they have between Sheridan and George Meade. And that's going to make a big part of this battle. George Meade they just don't like each other.
They don't get it. It's like, I don't know if it's an ego thing, but I mean, Sheridan clashes with, we know from our episode about Five Forks, how much Sheridan clashes with Warren as well. And I mean, Sheridan is coming from the Western Theater with Grant, and they have that kind of established friendship and relationship. But I mean, the way I see it is like, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Sheridan by any stretch. Sheridan is like his little lapdog, and he doesn't want to be told what to do by General Meade. He kind of is this person that's like, I'm only going to take orders from Grant.
Well, and he screws up 9 times in a row, but then the 10th time he succeeds. So he has a bad day, then he has Stones River. Bunch of bad days. He has Cedar Creek. So he's just enough to kind of, it's like losing
that
a lottery
Grant kind of turns
times,
a blind
then you finally
eye.
win, so you keep playing.
Yeah, Grant kind of turns a blind eye to it, and it's like Sheridan is never in Grant's doghouse, it seems,
Well, because they're boys. Sheridan, he is going to send his 2 division commanders, this is Wesley Merritt and Run DMG, David McMurtry Gregg, down the Brock Road, which is the road that connects the wilderness of Spotsylvania. Now, Meade, for the most part, is going to head down this road, and he's going to see what's going on. He will get to a place called Todd's Tavern. And if you've been there lately, it's got a beer store. I'm stunned you haven't been there if you haven't, to be honest, but it's a little beer market right now. Todd's Tavern, you can go there and you can buy beer for whatever you want to do. And he's going to see Union cavalrymen kind of sitting around chilling, doing nothing. And who's not there? Sheridan.
Yeah.
And so Meade, I don't know if you know this, Mary, but this fella's got a little bit of a temper, this George.
Yeah, is this where he, I read the story where he walked around and he literally was kicking soldiers in the ass, and he was like, get up, you need to get up now. And
so he was kicking them, just getting them going.
I'm totally picturing him doing that. It's hilarious.
And so he's mad. Because he knows he needs to clear Jeb Stuart. So Meade is going to get these guys. He's going to give them orders, tell them to get their hindquarters, and the horse you rode in on, if you know what I mean, down the Brock Road. He will finally find Sheridan in a place called Piney Branch Church, and at this location, you will have one of the all-time great swearing arguments take place between George Meade and Phil Sheridan. Sheridan's going to take offense that Meade ordered his men around. And Meade, he's going to basically say, if you look at Sheridan's quotes, he says that moving his cavalry was a profligate expenditure of cavalry to clear the road for some useless military infantry. That's what Sheridan said to Meade about him doing that.
Yeah.
He also blamed Meade for every cavalry failure in the history of mankind because of his meddling. When Meade finally enough, he goes to report Sheridan to the big man, to U.S. Grant, for insubordination.
Yeah.
Grant's like, it's just... And so what they end up doing is Sheridan decides he needs to GTFO. So what he's going to do is he wants to come up with this game plan that he wants to keep going past Spotsylvania to the south, draw out Jeb Stuart, beat him, and then that's going to be the end of it.
Yeah, and he's got this...
Meade's like, I'm going to need the cavalry here. We got a big battle coming up. And Grant basically says to Meade, Sheridan generally knows what he's talking about. Let him start right out and do it.
Which is like, why am I even in charge? And I mean, Sheridan wrote in his memoirs at this point, he's like, I found Meade's peppery temper had got the better of his good judgment. He's showing a disposition to be unjust, laying blame here and there for blunders that had been committed. He was particularly severe on the cavalry, But I mean, Sheridan hadn't had a great performance, and you have to remember I think Meade had a pretty good relationship with John Buford, who had unfortunately passed away December of 1863 from, I think it was tuberculosis. So Buford's
Well,
not in the picture anymore.
no, and so part of it's thinking, well, Meade's happy, Sheridan's gone, but the bottom line is going forward
They're
now,
without
there's no
cavalry.
cavalry anymore because
They
he
don't have
takes them.
anything to screen.
So he takes all of them. So that's going to prove to be a huge thing. So before this, but before Jeb goes though, Jeb basically is going to do whatever he can to slow the Union as they go to Spotsylvania Courthouse. Now, what he's going to do is if you go down there, you'll notice there's a bunch of ridges.
Yeah.
He's going to do what Buford did at Gettysburg. Jeb's going to set up on a ridge. He's going to slow them down. And then when the Union gets a little closer, he's going to fall back. That's the strategy he does. And for the most part, he is going to give Gouverneur K. Warren from the Fifth Corps absolute fits. Gouverneur K. Warren fell on his junk at the Wilderness, so he was in no good mood. So
Meade
now
and
he's
him got in a fight too over that.
yeah, and so he is going to have a tough time because for one, the roads are limited, and now everywhere he goes, he's dealing with Jeb's this cavalry. Now,
Yeah.
when Stuart finally reaches that last ridge right there at Spotsylvania Courthouse, he knows that he has nowhere else to go. So he's going to send a message, Jeb is, to Robert E. Lee, asking him to send infantry ASAFP to get up here because I need infantry. The nearest infantry is going to be the First Corps. Normally, this would be James Longstreet.
Yeah.
But Longstreet got shot at the Wilderness by his own men. So who takes over? Richard Anderson.
Yeah.
He's going to basically take over the Corps just a few days prior. So he's going to be new at this. And Anderson is he'll basically carve a road through he's going to get there. He's going to get his infantry. He's going to go through the woods. And while his infantry are showing up, here's Jeb. Jeb is ordering his men around. He's putting the infantry in different places.
Yeah.
He's like playing whack-a-mole. Union comes this way, hits them. They move this way, hits them.
Yeah.
And Jeb has a really, really good experience and a good day with this because he is leading infantry, leading his cavalry, and he's killing it. He's having a great day.
Jeb has proven himself that he's a pretty good cavalry guy. And he's also good at infantry because if you remember, like a year prior to this, after Stonewall Jackson got shot, he had to lead his guys at the Battle of Chancellorsville. So Jeb is pretty, versatile in that respect that he can go from cavalry to infantry. Like he seems to understand the tactics of both.
Yeah. And so this is going on. Richard Anderson's infantry is showing up. And Warren realizes at some point that he's not just fighting cavalry. He realizes he's fighting infantry now. And so he's stunned. He's like, how the hell do they get infantry up here? So while this is going on, he's slowing Warren down. Lee is sending more troops around and they're setting up a defense line at Spotsylvania, just outside on the final ridge of Spotsylvania Courthouse. Now, in the face of infantry, Warren is going to stop. He's going to realize he's going to put the brakes on to his Fifth Corps. He's going to wait until the Sixth Corps comes up, who's commanded by John Sedgwick. He's going to wait till he arrives on the field, and they're delayed because of a bunch of different reasons. They got a ton of men. Yeah. They got all those wagons. They're bogged down, and it's hot as hell.
Oh yeah,
it's unseasonably it's unseasonably warm for Virginia in this part of early May. It's 90 degrees. It's humidity. It's dusty, and it's just going to be brutal. The Union Second Corps under Winfield Scott Hancock, he's 3 miles back towards Todd's Tavern at the Wilderness. And they're also Hancock blocked too by the roads. They can't get anywhere. So everybody is kind of bogged. What this means is the Union army is arriving piecemeal. They're coming in different pieces.
Yeah.
The Ninth Corps under Ambrose Burnside, he's going to have to swing all the way around to up and around from the left to the right to get into position. It's going to take him forever to get there.
Yeah.
And it's partially because of the terrain and for the most part, the heath and those Stuart Ridge back attacks. For the most part, Stuart has done a great job delaying the Union army and letting Lee set up a defense line at Spotsylvania.
Yeah, he definitely has. And it's, and Meade accuses Sedgwick of being constitutionally slow in this regard. And this is also where Meade gets Meade and Warren kind of have it out over, Meade's just like, you need to cooperate with Sedgwick, and Warren's like, I'm not taking orders from anybody but you, kind of thing. And they have it out as well during this time.
There's a lot of this internal politics. You got a lot of new people coming in, and some of these troops are marching. You can only imagine how hot it was.
Well,
Some
and
of these
two,
guys,
the other thing too is like, it's easy for Jeb to see where they are, because again, this is where weather factors into Spotsylvania from the beginning to the end. Like, they're kicking up all this dust on the road too. So not only are they can be seen, but you think about, you're marching, you're thirsty, and then you have dust coming up. It's like you're breathing it in and everything else. It's miserable. Like, soldiers were suffering from heat stroke during this time as well. And two, the other thing, it hadn't rained in a while, and there's a bit of a drought at this time all over the United States, apparently. But I mean, that's obviously going to change in a few days, but still, it's hot and it's slowing everybody down, and they can't get any, and there's like, water is scarce as well.
well, there's nothing to drink. It's like when you come in from your run early in the morning, you need that morning beer. You're just sweaty, and it's the same thing. But these guys are marching through this hot, dusty dirt, and they're trying to get there. And what's going on though is what it did though. It did prevent Grant from hitting Lee with the full banana, the whole army. So now it played right into Lee's hands. So if you've been to Spotsylvania, but people who listen to this, if you've been to Spotsylvania and you've seen the battlefield, you'll notice a couple of things about it. First of all, how pristine it is. I mean, it's absolute. Very few monuments. It looks very similar to the way it did in 1864 for the most part. The other thing you're going to notice is the topography. Now, the ridges run along this terrain, and there's a natural high ground near a house that used to be there called the McCool Farm, which is a natural artillery platform. Just north of the McCool Farm is a ridge that kind of juts out. In when Confederate troops started to get there and started to fill in these ridges, they started to build breastworks on this ridge. When they did, they created a natural salient. Now, a salient's a military word. Most people know what that is. You hear a lot in Civil War battles, Sickles and Barlow and those guys. But for the most part, it tends to be usually bad for the people who are defending.
It's almost like it's like an area that kind of juts out. It's like an air bubble almost, right?
It juts out for the most part. It in some cases, it'll create a 90-degree angle. And a 90-degree angle, the reason why that's bad is it creates 270 degrees of attack radius. And it's tough to mount fire out. So if you're in a salient, it's a very tough position to defend. So May 9th, the men who are positioned in the salient are commanded by Richard Mule. Now, when Lee is going to inspect the line, he is going to immediately notice this salient, and he doesn't like it. Defending it is really, really difficult. And if the Union breaks through, they go right behind, they go right through. So it's a very difficult place. So Lee doesn't like it. Yule's okay with it, though. He says, listen, I can defend this salient. No worries, but I need as many artillery pieces as possible. So he's going to get Richard C.M. Page's artillery of 24 guns. This is four Virginia battalions and one from Alabama. So he's got 24 guns on this ridge. Now, when the men are in this position, the salients, because of the shape, they refer to it as the mule shoe salient. Why? Looks like a friggin' mule shoe. That's why they call it.
It does. If you look at it on a map, that's exactly what it looks like too. And it says like the Confederates, like you said, they know it's an area of weakness, but Ewell's pretty sure that it's going to be okay. And one quote I found about it was, "It's a bad piece of engineering and certain to invite attack as soon as the enemy understood it."
And they will. So, Ewell's guys are going to dig in. They're going to build breastworks, and Page's artillery is going to be in position in the mule shoe. At this moment, it's very heavily defended against any potential Union attack. It's pretty strong. While this is happening, this is on May 9th, the Union scouts are watching the Confederates and scouting the Confederate line. And they're trying to set up places for artillery. And it's tough to find because there's few and far between, but there are a few wooded areas. About a mile or so, maybe a little less than a mile in front of the Confederate line, the commander of the 6th Corps, John Sedgwick, is going to be riding on a horse near a battery of Union artillery. And rebel sharpshooters are in the area, and they're going to be taking shots. Bullets are going to be zipping by, and the artillery, as the bullets go by, the artillery guys are going to kind of duck and scatter.
Yeah.
And Sedgwick is going to be riding on his horse, kind of having a good time with them. And he's going to famously chide these artillerists. You know what he says?
Yeah. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance.
Not one few seconds later, Sedgwick is going to be shot by a carbine under his left eye, and it's going to kill him instantly. And the story gets mocked and joked about. You see the memes and all that. But in reality, the loss of John Sedgwick on the eve of this battle is catastrophic for U.S. Grant and the Army. If you read Grant's memoirs, he's going to write of Sedgwick. This is obviously afterwards. He stood very high in the Army as an officer and a man. He was brave and declined the command of the Army of Potomac once, if not often. His loss was a severe one to the Army of the Potomac and the nation. So this was a big loss. I mean, people think of John Sedgwick, tend to think of that, but that was a huge loss for U.S. Grant.
That was the one thing I realized in doing the research for this episode, and it made me think about another huge death in the Army in 1864, and that was out in the Western Theater when McPherson was shot and killed at the Battle of Atlanta. And Sherman had much the same reaction, that, this was a huge thing for, in the Western Theater, it was Army of the Tennessee, and now for the Army of the Potomac, this is a huge thing. And one of his staff described him saying Sedgwick was essentially a soldier. He had never married. The Army was his home, and the members of his staff were his family. He often slept outside with his soldiers. He'd done that on the last night of his life, at the edge of Spindle's Field in the area where they were camped. The morning that he was killed, he was described as being very cheerful. And in one of his last conversations was with one of his staff officers, and I'm going to butcher his name, but I think it was McMahon. And McMahon was like, basically telling him, dude, you need to stay back. And Sedgwick said to him, I would like to know who commands this corps, you or I. And they just had this exchange. And one of the other soldiers in the Sixth Corps said, we could not believe for a long time that our kind old leader had fallen, but soon it was confirmed that he was indeed gone. There is not a man in the Sixth Corps but what mourns his loss, nor anyone in the whole Army for that matter. And the other thing that was said about him was, we knew he was reckless and brave, but the thought that he would be killed never occurred to us. So this is a guy, his men referred to him as Uncle John. So right there's that kind of that family, that uncle sort of family thing. So this is a huge thing that now the, Grant and Meade and the Army of the Potomac are having to deal with going into Spotsylvania.
They're crushed. They are, but the show must go on. So taking over for him is going to be Horatio Wright. He's a divisional commander, and he's going to take him into that Sixth Corps. Now, Wright had huge shoes to fill and had no time to prepare for it for the most part. So what Wright's going to do is he will see that rebel position on the Mule shoe, and likely he sees a salient, and he knows that quickly that this is a situation that can be taken advantage of. That looks like they're vulnerable, despite seeing those 24 guns from Page, and the responsibility to break the salient is going to fall on the newcomer Horatio Wright and his Sixth Corps. So he's going to be responsible for it. He's going to sit down with his commanders now and try to devise a plan. When they're sitting around talking, the commander of the 2nd Brigade, a 24-year-old West Point grad from Batavia, New York, named Emory Upton, says he has an idea. Now, this is a hotshot type of guy. Upton was a confident fellow, Mary. Back at West Point, he famously challenged a classmate to a sword duel because a student made derogatory comments about him and black women. And he wasn't having it. So, but he's an abolitionist guy, and he's very for the Union.
Apparently, he had no sense of humor, though.
No, he's a tough one. But when the Civil War started, just real quick on Upton, he rose quickly in the ranks, and in October of 1862, he was named Colonel of the 121st New York at age 23, and he was a rising star. And he knew if he performed well, that he had a real good chance to get a star if he felt he did well.
He did.
So Upton's idea for the most part was this. He says, instead of attacking the Mule shoe in that traditional linear formation, he wanted to mass his troops in a dense group and attack them, he said, like a fist. He wanted to punch him with like a fist. And Upton wanted to rush the line, and he wanted to Kool-Aid Man right through the Mule shoe. Just burst right through and go real quick. The Federal troops would flood in, and for the most part to break that line. It was a very unusual tactic at the time, and it was rarely if ever used.
It had
So
been done a
Wright,
couple times.
right, but it's
Yeah.
very doesn't it's very
Yeah.
rare. So
Yeah.
Wright's going to take this idea and go to Grant. Grant's like, YOLO, why not? Sounds like a pretty good idea. So he's going to bless the plan. But the thing they didn't think about is when they burst through the line, what they were going to do then.
Yeah, like they're only going to have 4,500 men, right? Like it's 12 regiments. And where he got this from was the previous May at the Second Battle of Fredericksburg, which was fought during Chancellorsville. Upton and the 121st New York were 6 regiments that were overwhelmed by Confederates along the sunken road. But the troops ended up attacking in a narrow column that struck more like a fist than a wave in a traditional battle. And many of the same regiments had done something similar at Rappahannock Station, and that forced a Confederate withdrawal. So that's what Upton takes to them. And Grant, like you said, is totally cool with it. And he's going to have 4,500 men, including his own 121st New York. And again, he's talking to McMahon, who was the guy that was speaking to Sedgwick earlier. And he says, Upton, you are to lead those men upon the enemy's works this afternoon. And if you do not carry them, you're not expected to come back. But if you do carry them, I am authorized to say you will get your stars. So it's kind of like this whole thing with 300 Spartans, where it's like you either come home with your shield or on it.
Yeah, no question. He's not going to be by himself, though. He is going to have some other people attacking on Upton's left and right. At the tip of the salient is going to be the 4th Division of the 2nd Corps. This is under Brigadier General Gershom Mott. Now, Mott's a Jersey man, Mary. He was a grandson of Captain John Mott, who during the Rev War, he actually guided George Washington across the Delaware River for the Battle of Trenton. So he's got a lot of battle and a lot of history. Now it's Gershom Mott's turn to lead an army. And what's cool about his division is people wonder what ever happened to Dan Sickles' 3rd Corps. They ended up in Gershom's division. So when you look at his division, it's all the people from the 3rd Corps at Gettysburg, to 1st Mass and Excelsior, 71st, 70th New York, 5th New Jersey. The survivors, what was left of them, went to Gershom Mott's division. So that's where they all were. And so also in this attack is Warren's 5th Corps from a couple days before, and they're going to be attacking the other end of the Confederate line. So this entire assault, Upton, Mott, and Warren, was to be simultaneous, and it was going to begin exactly at 5 o'clock, which unfortunately didn't happen. It screwed up. We'll talk about that. But we've said a million times, basically, communication problems doom battles, and this was no different. And Upton wasn't ready to go at 5 o'clock, and he asked to delay until 6. Who knows why? I'm not ready. So, and of course, Horatio Wright and U.S. Grant, they acquiesce to this. They say, okay, well, if you're not ready, we'll go at 6 o'clock. But here's the problem. Gershom Mott was not told of this. So he's ready to go at 5 o'clock. So right on schedule at 5 o'clock, he moves his division out of the woods directly at the tip of the Mule Shoe. And those 24 guns of Richard C.M. Page are sitting there waiting. And they rake these guys. Mott's guys don't get 30 to 40 yards outside of the wood line when Mott issues General Order GTFO, and they get the hell out of there. Because they're getting absolutely wiped out by this artillery. So also, to throw this thing even worse, G.K. Warren looks at his clock. It's 4:30, says, close enough, and he goes.
I know, yeah. He kind of like, he's doing this thing where it's like, okay, I have my orders, but I'm going to use them as guidelines. And it's like, oh, I guess I can go in early because I want to.
Yeah, and his attack goes nowhere as well. So undaunted at 6 o'clock, Upton is going to begin his fist attack, which will be alone now because Mott and Warren are already out. They're done. You mentioned before, Upton has 12 regiments, 4,500 men. They're all handpicked personally by Horatio Wright. This is 43rd, 72nd, 121st New York, like you mentioned, 49th, 96th, 119th PA, the 5th and 6th Maine go to England, the 5th New England, the 5th Wisconsin, and the 2nd, 5th, and 6th Vermont. So when Upton saw the men he would have, he is going to tell, you mentioned Martin McMahon, he's going to tell McMahon, Mac, these are the best men in the entire army, he says to McMahon. So he's pretty excited about the opportunity.
Well, I mean, it's like you're 24 years old and the boss is like, you're like pitched your idea and they're like, yes, we'll do it. And the first ones that are going to go in with him in the first wave are the 121st New York, the 96 PA, and the 5th Maine, as you said, are part of this. And their job is to kind of kick that door open, like with everything they've got and using a bayonet. They were to load the muskets, but not put the percussion cap in place because they're basically like, they don't want them to fire them. And then after that, the men were to go either to the right or the left. And then from there, the other waves would come in, and there was going to be 4. The Vermont guys, the 2nd, 5th, and 6th are they're being held in reserve, and they're either going to be used to further exploit the gap or cover the possible retreat.
Yeah, I mean, and they're going to be going up against the Mule Shoe, which is straight. This is going to be guys from George Dole's Georgians.
Yeah,
this
it's called Dole's Salient, right?
Right.
Is what they've called
the 44 Georgia. So they're going to be against battle-tested veterans here from George Dole's.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're going to get to the line quickly in that mass assault at double quick, and they're going to get quickly into that hand-to-hand combat right at the breastworks. Now, the rebels were so surprised by this that many of them didn't even have time to reload after that first volley.
Yeah.
And they threw the muskets like spears. Now, the sun was also still blazing. It's 90 plus degrees. It's hot as hell when this assault's taking place. One of Upton's guys talking about the rebels. He says, the rebels threw their muskets at us like they were New England whalers. I mean, no word of Brick Tamlin was there with his trident, but you can get the idea of what they were. But they're literally throwing the bayonet muskets like because they didn't have time. Doles is going to get support from Junius Daniels' brigade after being ordered by Ewell to go help out. Ewell will tell Daniels, within 5 minutes, I'll have enough men to eat up every damn one of them. That's what he's going to say. Confident guy.
Yeah.
So Upton does break through after that severe hand-to-hand combat, but predictably, they can't hold it. They got 4,500 guys.
No.
And they start to fall back, but they do get 1,000 Confederate prisoners out of this. So it's a pretty good haul.
Yeah. Yeah. And someone said, Emory Upton said of it, here occurred deadly hand-to-hand combat. The enemy sitting in their pits with pieces upright, loaded and with bayonets fixed, ready to impale the first who should leap over, absolutely refused to yield the ground. The first of our men who tried to surmount the works fell pierced through the head by musket balls. Others, seeing the fate of their comrades, held their pieces at arm's length and fired downward, while others, poising their pieces vertically, hurled them down upon the enemy, pinning them to the ground. So this is kind of like, this is the fighting at Spotsylvania, and it's going to continue like this as the battle goes on. Like Upton's is just kind of like the opening act of all of this, and how this hand-to-hand brutal combat is going to continue through this battle.
Upton, it's considered a failed assault for the most part. Blame quickly fell on Gershom Mott for some reason.
Yeah, he's kind of the scapegoat. Like, I was trying to figure that out when I was reading about this battle. Like, I'm like, okay, like, I guess Mott kind of screwed up, but so did Warren. But why? Like, Mott seems almost like a scapegoat in all this.
This falls on Grant and Horatio Wright. There's no question, because Gershom Mott did what he was supposed to do at the time he was supposed to do it. Everything fell apart. Grant, though, did recognize Upton's heroicism and his plan, so he does get that star. So he is going to get promoted, and he's going to become a general. But the thing about it, though, as you mentioned just a second ago, it's kind of a test run. Upton's assault is going to prove to be the catalyst for the rest of the Battle of Spotsylvania. Now, Grant realized that Upton was able to break that rebel Mule Shoe with just 4,500 guys, and he wondered what would happen if I sent more, like maybe 20,000 in. So, and this is the thing. It's funny how these battles remind you of everyone. So, for the Gettysburg people, this is the same situation as when that George and Ambrose Wright broke through the angle on July 2nd. And then Lee says, you know something? Maybe I'll send everyone there and have better luck, which of course is Pickett's charge. So it's very similar to, if you think about the overall strategy.
That's what I was reading one thing, and it said, it's very similar to Pickett's charge in some ways, what Grant decides to do.
Yeah. So Grant's going to sit down. He's going to come up with the next phase of his attack with the memory of Upton's assault in the back of his mind. So instead of one division, Grant is going to hit the Mule Shoe with the entire Second Corps under Winfield Scott Hancock. 19,000 men is how much there's going to be. He will also use Horatio Wright's Sixth Corps, which is 20,000 more men, to support Hancock, as well as Ambrose Burnside's Ninth Corps, which will be on that Union far left, which is basically going to demonstrate. It's kind of what they're going to do.
Yeah.
But the whole attack is supposed to begin first light on May 12th. And we've talked many times about logistics with these battles,
Yeah.
specifically how to move large amounts of men and materials on small roads, and this is going to become an issue. Now, this situation, this battle is going to be pure comedy. Now, this whole thing. Now, Hancock's Second Corps was still about 3 miles away near that Todd's Tavern. They're going to have to move his entire corps to a staging area about a quarter or so mile in front of the Mule Shoe in a place called the Brown Farm. Now, Burnside's Ninth Corps is also going to have to move as well. And when the Second and Ninth Corps start to show signs of movement, these Confederate scouts report this to Lee. And he goes, yep, this is what I totally expected.
Mm-hmm.
This goes back to what we were saying earlier. You have a battle, the Union falls back and they retreat.
And that's what Lee thinks he's doing, is, and it's like, but at this point, Grant has written to Stanton and said, this is when he says, I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer.
Yeah, Grant's not planning on going anywhere.
No, he's staying.
Lee sees the movement, and he thinks they're going to cross the river and go back to Grandma's house at Fredericksburg. That's where they think they're all going, because that's what they always do. Now, Lee saw an opportunity here, right? And he wants to seize the initiative, and he's thinking, well, if Grant's go back to Fredericksburg, I can hit him. I can kick him in the butt on the way out. I want to take advantage of this. He begins to plan accordingly now for a counterattack. Now, not all of Lee's generals agree with him on this. A.P. Hill, who was, as usual, was sick and missed a lot of this battle, he wanted to stay, and he suggested staying in the trenches and just wait for Grant to come. And Lee responds, no, we must hit him in the open and strike them a blow, because if we stay in the trenches, it'll become a siege. And Lee knows that about this numerical disadvantage. He knows if this turns into a siege, he's done.
Yeah.
So he has to seize the initiative. He wants to move basically around Grant's left and intercept them before they can get to Fredericksburg. So he begins to make plans to move. Now, it's now May 11th now, same as today, happenstance.
Yeah, recording on the anniversary.
We are. The weather has significantly changed. It's gone from really, really hot and dry to absolutely pouring in like a monsoon.
Yeah, it completely changed.
The ground's turning to mud. The roads are quickly becoming impassable. For that reason, Lee wants to move his artillery first because they're the slowest moving things. I mean, obviously, Richard C.M. Page's artillery, who did so well in pushing Garcham away. They're at the Mule Shoe, and they're going to be the first ones that Lee is going to get moving. Because if, for one, they're the furthest away from the roads leading to Spotsylvania Courthouse. So he starts to move them. Now, these were the guns that Richard Ewell desperately said he needed to maintain that Mule Shoe defense. So moving them was extremely, extremely risky to his line.
He leaves
personally.
him 4, and it's Allegheny Johnson who's up there, and he leaves him 4 guns. Yeah,
Lee, and this is the thing, Lee's going to order those guns away without even mentioning it to Richard Ewell. Ewell's division commander, you mentioned, Edward Allegheny Johnson, he's going to discover that the guns are gone. And he had 24. Now he's got 4. Yeah. So he sees them missing and he goes, dude, where's my guns? Right? and he's going to go tell Ewell, and Ewell finds out, who immediately messages Lee to remind him again. He goes, remember I told you how crucial these guns were? Well, they're freaking gone.
Lee should know it's a salient and I don't know. This is one of those moments where I was reading this. I'm like, this is pretty risky to take the guns off a salient like that. And
it's risky if you think they're staying to attack. They're not risky if they think they're going. Lee is going to reluctantly say, all right, you know what? I tell you what, I'll get you the damn guns back, but they won't be back until at least morning because they're gone. So this is the best.
Well, they don't get the artillery doesn't get the order till 3 a.m. And by that point, it's like, well, I guess we got to bust it back there.
Johnson finds out Allegheny, his guns are gone until morning. He probably face palms. You could probably hear in Richmond when that happened. But Allegheny Johnson is a battle-tested Virginian, who've been fighting with Lee all the way back to the Western Virginia, back at the Battle of Greensboro River. So he's been with Lee forever. He fought in the Valley with Stonewall Jackson, where he took that bullet at the Battle of McDowell in the ankle. and
Yeah.
he never recovered from it. And he needed that hickory walking stick everywhere he went, and that's why he earned the nickname Old Clubby to his
Yep.
men, because he carried this stick around. Now it's funny thing about Allegheny Johnson. People don't really pay attention to him because why the hell would you, right? Allegheny Johnson had this weird eye issue that he blinked when he
And they
got
called him Old
nervous.
Blinky, right?
I don't know if they call him Blinky, but he always blinked. And there's that really fun story where he's after he gets shot at the Battle of McDowell in his ankle, he's back in Richmond and he's rehabbing. And he was fond of the ladies, Allegheny Johnson. He
Ooh.
got like to get his swerve on. Well, there's that one story where he's sitting there at a party and he's talking to some dude's wife and he starts blinking at her naturally. And hilarity ensues, and they and almost an issue with this guy, with this one woman and her husband,
Oh
because
my
he has this
God.
natural weird blinking thing, which is one of those things. But in any case, he's Johnson's really nervous. He's scared about this situation. So
Mhm.
he's going to go to bed on the 11th of May, and he's so nervous he sleeps in his full uniform, keeps
Mhm.
his boots on. I'm just going to lay down. This is
I
the
honestly don't blame him because you know you're in a position that is very vulnerable to attack, and you probably are like, what hardcore evidence do we have that Grant is falling back to Fredericksburg? Like I would, if I had been him, I would have been like, I want to see the like actual proof of this because I don't know. I mean, I get taking some guns, but like 20, that's excessive. And then you're like exposed,
Well, don't forget. I
and
mean, Lee realized it's an attrition thing. He has
yeah,
to hit them when he can. And
yeah,
just by past history, I mean, this is
yeah.
this is Lee. This is what he thought. Now, the brigade on the Mule Shoe that night was a brigade of a bunch of Virginians under William Witcher. And when you're on the front line, part of your responsibility is you have to send a picket line out. Witcher
Yeah.
took over John Jones, who was killed at the Wilderness a few days before, but so he's new to command as well. So he's going to set up the 21st Virginia and told in Johnson is going to tell everyone, the brigade people on the line, as well as the picket line. He says, stay alert and stay awake.
He
That's
basically
what
says,
Allegheny
don't
says
sleep.
to
You're
them.
not sleeping. You're not
Right.
sleeping tonight.
Well, the picket's not going to sleep anyway,
Yeah.
but the people on the line, after that, like I said, he goes to bed in full uniform and he's got to hope for the best. Now, what's happening on the Union side on the May 11th is interesting too, because at 7 p.m., Winfield Scott Hancock is going to meet with his three division commanders, as of course is Francis Barlow, John Gibbon, David Bell Birney.
Yep.
Garcia Mott he's there, but his men are detached, so he's not really part of it at this phase anyway. Hancock is going to tell them of Grant's plan. And he's going to tell them we're going to use the entire Second Corps. We're going to attack the rebel right flank right at the Mule Shoe, right at daybreak the next day. But he didn't offer any details beyond that.
It's like that person that when they go on Facebook and they write what they're doing, but called vague booking. That's what he does. Like it's basically, the troop said it's lacking basic information about what exactly is going to happen. What obstacles could we potentially be facing? He's like basically giving them the times, but being very vague about it.
Well, I mean, Francis Barlow, he's going to say of it, we were told of the importance of the assault, but given no critical details.
Yeah.
The detailed plans obviously are very critical, to any battle success. And Barlow was concerned. He went on. I'm going to read again. He says, no information whatsoever was given to us as the position or the strength of the enemy or the troops to be engaged, nor as to the plan of attack or to why this attack was going to be made at the time or the place anyway. So he's like, what the hell's this is
Yeah.
stupid.
Yeah.
And so
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, old Frank has got his dander up with this. He doesn't like it. And
I
the
don't
funny part
blame
about
him.
no, but Hancock, when Hancock was questioned, he told his division commanders the attack was, and this is unbelievable. He goes, the attack plan was determined by a compass from the Brown House toward a large white house known to be inside the enemy's works. So they're like, huh, okay.
Okay,
Now
well,
it
do
should
you know the terrain you're going to be
well,
over?
that's the thing. It should be noted that this terrain was not scouted, and no one really had any idea if there even was a friggin' White House back there, and they didn't know how many to expect. They had no idea. So Barlow, Gibbon, and Birney, they're going to go back to their men, and they're going to begin this march to the Brown House, and which is going to be the staging area now for this
Yeah.
battle attack the next morning. Now, It's probably 11 o'clock at night. It's late. At this point, when the men begin this, it's about a 3 mile march. It is absolutely pouring. It is so dark.
Yeah.
You could not see your hands in front of your face. This is 19,000 men stumbling on a horrible, dark, and rainy night, and the complaints began immediately.
Oh, yeah,
John Haley,
oh, yeah, go
right?
ahead. Sorry.
John Haley, the 17th Maine, he's one of Bernie's guys. He's going to say, when darkness set in, it was black. On what direction we had ordered to move, we could not tell. We marched for several hours and then stumbled into a camp of slumberers, which we marched right over, knocking down stacks of guns, treading on heads and other portions of human anatomy. The air was sulphurous with their responses. So you can just imagine they're walking into the camp and these people are like, get the hell out, da, 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 da. There's so many good stories. Joseph Hodgkins, the 19th Mass, was one of Gibbon's guys. In the second division, he's going to say, it was hard, wearisome march, raining all the time, making it very muddy, swelling the little brooks to torrents, though we had to wade, filling our boots with water and having no time to empty them as it was a forced march. So the thing about, you got to remember, these guys, they're tired. They've been fighting for basically 8 straight days. They're awoken up in the middle of the night to go to a forced march through the dark where they have no idea where they're going. It's pouring rain. It was so bad that when the column stopped, men were falling on the ground and falling asleep immediately.
Yeah, like they're exhausted. And one guy said nobody knew where we were going, but a rumor was started that we were going back to the rear to rest and wash our clothes. And this proved partially true, as it rained so hard all night that our clothes were thoroughly washed, but they needed wringing badly. I think I can safely say that of our many night marches, this one took the cake. The roads were described as being awful. It rained continuously. And the thing is like, you and I both read an article that was about the weather at Spotsylvania. It talks about how the soil in this particular area that they're in, it's like sandy and stuff, but then it's almost like clay. And when it rains as much as it did, it becomes impossible to move through.
Right.
Like their boots are getting stuck in it and everything else. And another guy said, every man followed his leader, not by sight or touch, but by hearing him growl and swear as he slipped, splashed, and tried to pull his feet out of the mud.
I mean, and this is not just on the enlisted men, the officers. Barlow, he went from division commander to disgruntled office temp in one day with this march. So he's going to write down, I remember well the loudly expressed indignation of the officers sent to conduct an important movement. They had no information whatsoever as to the position or the strength of the enemy. It was a sense of the ludicrous, the absurdity of the situation prevailed over the feeling of responsibility. He then goes on to say, Colonel Miles, Nelson Miles, we'll talk about him later, and John Rutterbrook rode with me to the head of the column and were loud in their complaints of the madness of this undertaking. I had to tell Miles to be quiet so the men didn't hear him, because you don't want the men hearing this. But it goes on and on. William Priver, one of Hancock's adjutants, he's going to write about this march. The intense darkness, pouring rain, and muddy, heavy roads with the uncertainty of the direction. It goes on and on and on. It's laughable about how bad this was.
Yeah.
And you can see why they were mad. I mean, they're about to go into battle now, and they're blind, both literally and figuratively, right? And it gets even better with this. The guides that Hancock sent to lead them, Colonel C.H. Morgan and G.M. Mandel, to the Brown farm, they have no idea where they're going either. The whole thing is a complete shit show. You think the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, who runs the MBTA, figured this one out? That's how bad this one was.
I think that's who's currently running the MBTA, actually.
but when they finally did arrive, they did make it. The division commanders are going to meet with Hancock at the Brown farm, which was basically going to be that launching off point for that attack now later in a couple hours in the morning. Lieutenant Colonel Merriam, he's a member of Gershom Mott's staff. What he did is he put up a big piece of paper on the wall of the Brown house showing where he thought the rebel line was. Now, note, Merriam has never seen the rebel line. He said, I think you're here. They're planning their attack plan on this. And don't forget, too, and this is why the Sheridan thing is important, because the issue with Meade, the eyes and ears are gone. They've got no one to scout this.
Yeah.
So, again, this is why this decision to send, is the death of Jeb Stuart worth what these guys are about to go through? because that's the math equation you got to think of, right?
That's kind of the trade-off. And that's one thing I really thought about when I was researching this episode and reading about it was like, Sheridan, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more in our second episode too, but Sheridan goes on about, how important the death of Jeb Stuart is, makes it seem really, really important. And as I'm reading this,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
like, really, is this worth it, what these guys are going through right now
Well,
without that cavalry screening?
and Barlow at this point is just like, so they're looking up the wall and he goes, this is where we think they are. And Barlow is going to turn, he's going to sarcastically say to Merriam, are you sure there's not a 1,000-foot ravine between us and the rebel lines? And he kind of rolls his eyes at him. And so this is the mindset going into this. Now, seeing the perceived hopelessness of this entire situation, Barlow is going to say, you know what, this is stupid. He starts passing over his valuables to a friend of his, saying, I ain't coming back from this. This is stupid. Can you please take my stuff? This is a suicide mission. Please take, clear my history cache, do all the important things.
He must be
But
pissed at Hank. The one thing too is like, I can't imagine how he feels towards Hancock right now with this. Like,
well,
Hancock was basically like, I don't know where I'm sending you, but can you please go?
well,
Kind
the
of
thing
thing.
about Barlow's personality does change. Now, Francis Barlow, he was new to this command for the most part.
Yeah.
He didn't really know his men. The only thing his men knew about Francis Barlow is that he was a prick. He was very hard disciplined. After Sedgwick got shot, a lot of the officers took off their sideboards because they didn't
Yeah.
want to be shot by sharpshooters. Barlow says, put the freaking sideboards back on your damn jackets, or I'm going to court martial you. And they're like, oh, come on. So this is how he was.
Yeah.
But for the most part, once this whole thing went down, Barlow is going to give orders to his men, and he was different. Instead of fiery and angry and determined and disciplined, he was subdued. He was strangely kind to his men. He was suddenly nice. And the men noticed a change in the demeanor. To them, this is not good. This is a bad sign.
If
All
Barlow's
those things,
nice, it's not
all
good.
those things I said about you, look, I think you're a great guy. Don't worry about it. You're a good dude. And they're all like, what the hell's going on? That's what was going on. So, the reality was Barlow knew that he had a responsibility to his men.
Yeah.
He's about to lead them into battle with little knowledge of a waiter for them. These troops were not green. These are battle-tested veterans.
Yeah.
And they knew this was going to be a tough one. They knew it.
Well, I think what's
So,
happening is like Barlow is sensing like, okay, we don't have clear orders from Meade or Grant, or, he doesn't have clear orders from his direct boss, Hancock. So Barlow is picking up on this. It's not really a power vacuum, but it's one of those things where sometimes like there's certain people that when they recognize that there's not the leadership they need, they go into that role of being the leader and being the strong person and being like, I have to be calm and collected and figure things out for these guys. And that's what I think what Barlow is doing in this situation is he's like, I gotta be the adult in the room kind of thing, because I was not given clear orders, so I gotta figure this out for myself.
he does, and he begins, in his defense, he begins to put his division in that tight column, that fist formation that Upton had done a couple of days before. So he is going to have a very similar tactic. He's going to put his men in that tight, dense column. David Bell-Birney's division is going to be on his right, spread in that traditional linear formation. So they're going to swing like a hammer. That's how they basically going to do. He said these 19,000 men, he goes, they could take hell itself. That's what he said about because he was confident, but on his men anyway. The rain's going to start to slow a little bit into a mist, and it covered everything. And the attack was supposed to start at 4 o'clock in the morning, but because of the fog, it was delayed. And by the time the men started to begin to move, it was 4:20. It's probably why there was so much smog. So it was 4:20. Realistically, that's probably why. But just a few hundred yards in front through that woods is going to be that rebel picket line I mentioned under Witcher that I talked about, right? Now, all night long is, they heard this picket line, heard the sounds of marching men in the woods in their front, going from their left to their right. And the sounds weren't really a surprise because they were told Grant's men were retreating in that direction. So that large noise, cacophony, I guess they said about it, of this marching, and they got used to it. And as the night turned during the early hours of the 12th, the sounds changed. The sounds of marching men was now replaced by the sounds of thousands of men whispering in the woods, and the footsteps were no longer moving from left to right. They basically stopped. Was it the soldiers preparing for an attack? Maybe it was the Rosewoods clown. They didn't know what the hell it was, but it was something different, and they didn't know what the hell was going on, but they smelled a rat. An officer on the picket line is going to become convinced that maybe there's something going on. He's going to be concerned. He's going to go to Witcher, and then he's going to go to General George H. Stewart, Maryland Stewart. He's going to go to him, and they're going to come back. They're going to go get them, bring them to the line, and say, "Listen, tell me what do you hear?" And they're going to come, and they hear this eerie murmuring of whispering men in the woods, and there's no more marching.
That was so creepy.
And that's what's going on. Stewart said it sounded like a waterfall of noise, and he was convinced they were about to be attacked. He goes, "They're not marching, they're forming." So he's going to write back to the McCool house, which is that white house they talked about. They're going to go back to, and he's going to wake up Allegheny Johnson, who's in his full uniform in his boots, and he's been nervous all night. And now he's in a panic because the guns are still not back; they're still gone. And what's going to happen is he's going to go find Richard Ewell. He's going to say who, and he's going to sleep. He's sleeping in a place called the Harrison Farm, and he's going to beg him, "Listen, I need this artillery. I need it. Hook me up. Hook a brother up here." And so Ewell goes, "Well, let me go find Lee. I'll go find Lee and see what the hell he wants to do." Lee here's this note. Here's this what's going on. Ewell goes, "Here's what they're hearing. Here's what's going on." Lee says, "Don't worry about it. They're just retreating. Don't worry about it. It's just a sound of Grant moving." But Johnson, Allegheny's like, "No." He goes, "This is not, he's wrong." So he's going to basically send the order to find those missing 20 guns. Thomas Carter's battalion, that's who has these guns. And these are the ones that have moved out. Carter is about 2 miles away. And when the messenger arrives, it's like, "Come get the guns." The men are asleep. The horses are grazing in the fields. The guns are, they're not ready to go. So it'll be probably a half hour before daybreak before they actually get going. So what you have is this race between Hancock's men going to the Mule Shoe and Carter's guns going to the Mule Shoe. Neither knows they're in a race, but they are. And when Hancock's men who started that move towards the Mule Shoe at 420, they couldn't see what was going on either. They had about 50 yards of visibility in all directions because it's dark, it's misty, and you're in the woods, and they're told specifically to be quiet. So that's what the whispering was, like, "Shh, no, shut up, you don't be quiet." They're trying to be quiet, they're being very, very quiet. And that's what they're going to be doing. Now, Barlow, as you can imagine, is still not thrilled about this whole thing.
No, he's very sarcastic. Like he said at one point, "For heaven's sake, at least face us in the right direction so that we shall not march away from the enemy and have to round the world and come up in their rear."
He's still, exactly. He doesn't know where the hell they're going. And the only thing that they know for sure is that there was and this is the thing too, that their plan was simple. The Rebs are on a ridge. Go knock them off. Go through them. And so they're like, okay, that's all they knew for sure. Okay.
It's kind of similar to what Sherman was going to do, I think, at Missionary Ridge, it was a hilly area, right? And he's just like, basically, you need to go to this area and get Claiborne. And that's kind of, I think in a way it's similar. One soldier said, like, in the dim gray light of that early morning, spring morning, with the mist rising from the field and thicket, and while the birds were faintly chirping in the bushes and trees as they noted the coming of dawn, the grand old 1st Division moved forward under perfect silence.
And they had to move quietly. So it's probably just before 5 o'clock in the morning, realistically, give or take. In the 48th Virginia, they're going to make it to the rebel picket line to relieve the other Virginians. They're come and relieve them. And they're the ones who, they're hearing all this stuff, and there's all kinds of stuff going on too. And they're in the process of changing. These guys are coming, these guys are going back. All of a sudden they notice all the birds on the trees start taking off. They fly right out of the trees, like a whole bunch of them. And very similar to when Jackson routed your boy there at Chancellorsville, when the animals came through, right?
There's our Howard reference for this episode. I thought I was going to, you were like, "How are you going to get this in?" You managed to get it in for me.
Well, the 48th Virginia sees all these birds flying at them now. And moments later, the first Union troops are going to exit the woods, in front of the picket line that's on this ridge. And the first shot is going to be fired from a location nearby called the Landrum House. And when the first shot's fired, it's not going to stop for 22 straight hours. It's going to be the longest sustained combat in the Civil War, starting with this. Now, the initial fire from the Union troops was so intense that one rebel literally grabbed his head to make sure it was still on. I better check. I don't know how the hell he's
Wow,
thinking,
that's yeah, they
but
said like and the pickets, like when they started firing, one Union soldier said they had to do one of two things, surrender or skip. And I think every picket in front of our lines skipped for dear life.
oh yeah, Barlow's men, they rushed right through this. This picket line was absolutely helpless. Many of the Virginians surrendered before they even had a chance to raise their rifles. That's how quick this thing
Yeah.
was.
And
And
apparently the
a few
Union guys let forth a yell which woke people in Washington.
so exactly. So a few minutes later, I mean, they get through. And I mentioned before that they were attacking this ridge with
Yeah.
Confederates on it. They walk out, they attack Confederates. Guess what? They're on a ridge. Well, this is it.
Yeah.
So now they're thinking, well, this was friggin' easy. They're going to capture this ridge. And all of a sudden, all that angst and all that anxiety they released and started cheering. Yahoo! We did it. I mean, it must have been thinking, this is what we went all night for this.
Yeah.
And so they're thinking this is great. They're high fiving each other. This is the greatest thing in the world. And then as the morning starts to get a little bit lighter, they look through the haze and the sun and the sunrise is coming. They look in the distance across the field, 200 yards away, and what do they see? They see another ridge with breastworks on it.
Yeah.
And one of the guys said, "That's no more. It's a space station." That's probably what he said, right? But they realized that the ridge they got was the wrong ridge.
Yeah.
That's not the ridge.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids. So they were like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, that
So
sucks. That's kind of like a Billy Goat Hill situation.
oh
right
yeah,
there.
yeah. I mean, you think you have it, all of a sudden you look and you see this ridge with
Yeah,
dirt on top of it, and you're like, oh crap.
That's what I was
So
saying was like Missionary Ridge. It's like this is like the Billy Goat Hill thing with Sherman.
yeah. So it's 200 yards away, and they're looking at the mule shoe now, and the people on the mule shoe, the Rebs, they couldn't see the Union troops because of that mist. Now they could certainly hear them. They heard them cheering, screaming, and immediately, as soon as they started hearing the yells and the huzzas and everything like that, the Rebs are going to line up and they're going to get ready.
Yeah, they have time to get ready for these guys.
One of the Rebs said the cheers were so loud they thought it was cannon fire. That's how loud these cheers were.
Wow.
And whatever element of surprise Barlow thought he had is obviously completely gone. But they can hear the Union, but they can't see them. And this is where you get lucky. The 20 guns are on their way, but they haven't been there yet. They still got the 4, and the 4 guns start firing. And at this point, the Union men know this is all that cheer has turned solemn again. Barlow knew he had to get his men across that field. And if you've been there, you've seen the field. It's a field, but in the middle, there's kind of a dip. I don't want to say ravine, but it's a pretty good sized dip. So if you're like an undulation, there you go. Or if you're running across it, yeah, you'll run across. It looks like you've been swallowed up. Now that is all filled with mist at this point, so you can't be seen. Because of the sound of that valley, that cauldron of the mist in the field, the Rebs hear the cheers, and it's way back at that picket line. So now they're moving forward, but they line their guns up on that ridge line. So they're firing over the Union guys, and they don't even know it. They're firing at sound. And so what happens is, for the most part, Barlow's realized they're shooting over us, but we're in the middle of a freaking field here. So if we wait here, we're dead. They're going to get us eventually. So he's going to say, we got to run full speed at the mule shoe. Double quick. Barlow's going to yell, forward, double quick charge. And they all go. And they're going to run full speed. This is 19,000 guys, full speed across this field. They're going to hit that mule shoe at a full sprint, just as those missing rebel guns are starting to arrive. They're all kind of getting there at the same time. Barlow won that race by maybe 5-10 minutes. That's how close. That's how close they came. Another half an hour later, they would have had those 20 other guns.
Well, I mean, he is former 11th Corps, so he knows how to run.
Oh, he probably had the proper sneakers, no question about that. But it's one of the, we'll talk about some of the Rebs. One of the Rebs who was captured was was Maryland Stewart. He said it was one of the, we'll get to him, but some of the men in Stewart's brigade, they got caught. And one of them said, a cloud of blue uniforms came pressing down on our works, completely filling the space in the angle. The mule shoe was as hectic as the Gettysburg DQ on buy one, get one free Blizzard Day. That's how crazy this was going on all of a sudden. And it's still dark and it's still misty, right? So with no artillery, and the thing is with no artillery platform, Hancock is trying to, he's over at the Landrum farm and he's trying to set up some kind of artillery. He has 24-pound shell mortars. He's going to try to fire these from the Landrum house into the mule shoe.
Mm-hmm.
David Holden, he's the 16th Mississippi. He was in there at the trenches. He wrote about these mortars. He says, the enemy moved some mortars in a position and attempted to drop a few shells in our trench, mostly overshot and undershot. One made a direct hit. He writes, there were 2 men in the breastworks and a shell burst between them. One blew into the ditch in fragments, and the head of the other was knocked off without moving his body. So that's how it was going on. Now, because of the wet weather and how close the troops were all intermingled, they stopped with the mortar. They just can't do it. Now, Barlow's men, they're barreling through the lines while this is happening. Now, David Bell Birney's 20 guys start coming.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be moving, and they're going to be attacking that western side of the Mule Shoe Slope, which is going to later be called the Bloody Angle. We'll talk about that next time, the more detail about the Bloody Angle. But this is the angle that they're coming at. Now, the men on Barlow's front, for the most part, the Confederates are mostly awake the whole night long, but some of the other ones who weren't on the Mule Shoe, they were sleeping. And when they ran to the line to fire their guns, guess what happened?
They didn't go off because they had kept them upright during the night, and the rain had got in, makes the powder damp. So, I mean, you still hear a pop, but nothing else happens because everything. So
they grab their guns, they rush up, and they shoot, and a flower comes out.
Yeah,
like a clown, and they go, "Oh, come on!" And that's what happens because they were not ready. So it was right around this time when Carter's guns start to come up, and they're being captured for the most part by Birney's men before, because they're shooting the horses as they're coming up, and they're grabbing the guns. What they're doing. Now, it was around this time, and this picture, this fights going on, hand-to-hand combat. There's a story of Hickory Hat. You know the story of Hickory Hat?
No, I don't.
Hickory Hat was a name of a giant rebel soldier from the 23rd Virginia in Stewart's brigade, and he was fighting Birney's guys right on that western side of the Mule Shoe Salient. He was a big, muscular monster. He ends up in a hand-to-hand combat fight with an equally sized big Union guy, and they got their rifles and they're pushing against each other. Finally, Hickory Hat, he basically looks at him and he says, would you rather wrestle? Guy goes, yeah, let's wrestle. They put the guns down, and they who knows if there was an RKO situation, but they started wrestling. Hickory Hat pushes the Union guy down, starts jabbing his thumbs in his eyes.
Oh my God, that's like freaking Game of Thrones shit right there.
But the Northern guy says, I submit, and he lets go. And that they were really just wrestling. They just had a wrestling match. Hickory Hat got caught. He got hauled back. But it's a great story when you look at some of these stories. But the Union 6th Corps under Horatio Wright, they're going to enter now. They're going to enter the dance floor, and they're going to follow Birney's men.
Yeah.
So there's wave after wave heading towards this Bloody Angle slope, and that'll continue on and on. We'll talk about that later. But down the line, you have the Louisiana Tigers now, who are being run by William Monahan. Now, Harry Hayes, people know him from Gettysburg. He got shot down while they were setting the breastwork, so he's out of the picture. It's Monahan now, and he's going to see these Birney's guys coming, and he's going to yell down the line, "Look out, boys! We will have blood for supper tonight." That's what he yelled, and then of course his Tigers got routed. That was the end of them. So much for Louisiana Tigers, But even the famous Stonewall Brigade was part of this as well. They got defeated. And this is obviously Stonewall Jackson, the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 27th, 33rd Virginia, now commanded by James A. Walker.
Yeah.
Now, James McCown, part of that 4th Virginia, he's going to say, we fought so desperately, never dreaming of capture until we were completely surrounded by overwhelming numbers. You know the story of James Walker, by the way, about his history with Stonewall?
No, I know he's called like he's got like a Stonewall type nickname, and he's leading
So
the brigade.
here's this is actually just this is actually a good story about uh, James Walker. He was a student of Thomas Jackson at VMI. He
Oh,
was a
okay,
student.
yeah.
Okay, Stonewall. Well, he was he wasn't Stonewall then, but Thomas Jackson, for whatever reason, Jackson wanted to expel Walker from the school.
Oh,
Get
right,
the
yeah, okay.
right.
Now it's coming
So
back to me his story.
Walker, he's gonna get pissed off and he's gonna go to old Professor Jackson. He's gonna challenge him to a duel. He wants to kill him. So Walker very much wanted Jackson to cross the river and rest under the shade of the trees a few years early, is what he really wanted to do. Now, Jackson, he refused the duel because he said that he wasn't of comparable rank, and so it didn't happen. So Walker gets expelled. He gets kicked out of school. 1861, he signs up as a private in Stonewall Jackson's brigade.
Wow.
Mary Jackson sees the name and says, Thomas, I don't think you should have this guy around you because I'm pretty sure he wants to kill you. And Thomas is like, oh, no, don't worry about it. They became close during the war, and he actually promoted James Walker to run his brigade. And so you went from a student who got kicked out who wanted to kill him to promoting him to his brigade. Now Walker's in charge of the whole thing. Stonewall's gone, but that's the story of James Walker and Stonewall Jackson. It's just these stories are funny.
I know everything everything interweaves with each other, it seems.
Oh yeah, and as this goes on, in this initial assault, Hancock's men are going to sustain a complete victory. 4,000 prisoners, 24 pieces of artillery, in basically 1 hour. And one of the couple of 4,000 prisoners is going to be Edward Allegheny Johnson, old Clubby. He's going to be caught, and when he's captured, he's standing on top of the breastworks. In the stories, he's waving his club, whacking. It's a miracle he wasn't gone down, but he's just swinging. That was his weapon. He was swinging his club at people. Well, inevitably, he's going to get caught. He'll get taken behind the line where he's going to run into his old friend Hancock. Him and Hancock had some shenanigans in Mexico. They were kind of both. So they met, and tears are rolling down Allegheny Johnson's eyes, and he's just probably thinking about that personal loss of his men. And Johnson is going to be greeted by Hancock, and Johnson's going to tell Hancock, "This is worse than death for me." And then Hancock's going to respond, "This is the fate of war, General. You are a soldier." And so another soldier who gets caught, another general, is of
Maryland
course
Stewart.
Maryland Stewart. And the story of his capture is just awesome. And it's quite the opposite. He's captured by a guy named Colonel James Beaver of the 148th Pennsylvania, from Millerstown, Pennsylvania, not far from Gettysburg, actually. Mm-hmm. When he's captured, Stewart says to him, "I wish to surrender to an officer of rank. I am General Stewart." Beaver's eyes grew wider than you would looking at the IPA menu at that moment. Goes, "You're Jeb Stewart?" And he goes, "No, I'm George." He goes, "Oh, okay, fine." And so he thought he bagged Jeb Stewart. He thought it was Maryland Stewart.
Well, I mean, unbeknownst to these guys at the time, Jeb Stewart has passed away. I think today is the day that Jeb Stewart passed away.
He thinks he's bagged the big cavalry fish. Wow. He got Maryland Stewart. And so Beaver then demands his sword. And Stewart sarcastically replies, "Well, sir, you woke me up so early this morning, I didn't have time to put it on, so I don't have it." So that's what he says to him.
Oh, God.
And so he gets taken behind the lines. He knows old Winnie Boy from before the war, too.
Yeah.
And Hancock goes to stick his hand out. And Stewart looks at him and says, "Under these circumstances, I cannot take your hand." Then Hancock, he snaps back and says, "In different circumstances, I wouldn't have even offered it." And what the best part about it is, they all get taken back now.
Yeah.
Allegheny Johnson gets to ride in the ambulance because Hancock likes him. Stewart's got to walk with the rest of his men, the 4,000 guys. He makes his ass walk.
Wow.
So it's just a great thing.
That's a great story.
In this why catch flies with honey and vinegar. I tell you all the time, Mary. Keep it to people. Walking, but this initial part of the assault is a famous one because it led to 43 medals of honor just on this part of the battle. 22 were from picking up flags in the middle. They were. Wow. The youngest Medal of Honor recipient was Archibald Freeman. He was a 16-year-old kid from the 124th New York, the Orange Blossom Regiment, Mary. And so this is kind of what happens with this. But this is what's amazing about this whole thing is during all this, Robert E. Lee is in the rear, and he's completely unaware of this rout in
Yeah.
progress. And he's standing there in the back. He's behind the cool house, and he sees some of his men running, and he starts yelling at them. What are you running? Stop! Go back to your regiments. Go back to your regiments. And they just keep going. They
Yeah.
totally 11th it and keep on going. And
11th.
he's like, well, what the hell's going on here? So he has no idea what the story is.
Mm.
One of Allegheny Johnson's staff officers, a guy named Robert Hunter, comes riding by on a horse heading towards the back. Must have been an artillery horse. Probably grabbed one of the artillery horses. And he's going to basically ride back, and he's going to find Lee. And he's going to tell Lee, Hunter's going to tell Lee, the line's completely breached. Everything is in shambles. It's a complete mess up front. At this moment, Lee, who was thinking up to that very moment that Grant is retreating, suddenly has that pucker effect moment,
Yeah,
and his
like, oh,
demeanor
yeah.
completely changes.
Yeah.
Now, think about it for a second, right? Moments earlier, he's thinking, okay, I'm going to attack Grant. I got the guns on the way. We're going to
Yeah.
hit him before he gets to Fredericksburg. We're going to keep him on the run. We're going to seize the initiative. All of a sudden, he's in an existential moment of this could be over right now. No more Army of Northern Virginia. No more war in Virginia at all. No, in the East, he has this holy shit moment that we are on the verge of complete and utter destruction right now, and he didn't even see it coming.
Yeah. And he doesn't see it coming at all. And this is where he kind of has this like, what do I do moment.
I mean, his left and his right wings are separated.
Yeah.
The Union troops are flowing through the middle like water through a dam. And he's, for the most part, he knows he has to do something immediately. He knows that he is literally hanging off the ledge right now by his thumbs. And if he doesn't do something right now, this whole thing is over. So, I mean, what's he going to do? I mean, can he save the army? And that, Mary, is where we're going to stop this episode. And we're going to pick it up next time, because we're going to find out what Lee does do and how he can reconcile his army together and try to push back this on-flowing guys. But at this moment, it looks pretty bleak for the
it's very bleak with the guys coming, through. Even though they've gotten the wrong spot to begin with, they're still breaking through because they've still caught them kind of unaware. But yeah, Lee is gonna have to go and kind of regroup and figure out, oh, what am I gonna do now that these guys have broken through? They weren't going to Fredericksburg like I thought they were. So he's gonna have to think pretty quickly on his feet about that.
Right. And we'll talk about this next time when we finish this episode, but this is where you're going to get guys like John Brown Gordon getting involved. And you're going to have other people on that second line get involved in this. And we're going to talk about the bloody angle and that consistent, endless battle, that nonstop fighting and blood that's going to take place at the Battle of Spotsylvania. So I guess we can finish up right here. So we'll leave that's a little cliffhanger for the people who probably don't know how this thing finishes up. But suffice it to say, the second half of this battle is going to be just as violent as the first. And it's going to, we'll talk about a lot of different people. Some maybe you have heard of, and some maybe you haven't heard of, but it's going to tell that story of Spotsylvania. If you've not been to Spotsylvania, I would highly suggest you go.
Have to visit. It's an amazing battlefield.
You can see for the most part exactly where the mule shoe, the breastworks are. They're still there. You can walk across that field. You go there in the morning, you can see the mist in the field covering everything. It is pristine. And it's a fantastic place. So that's I usually say what's next for us, but I guess I'll do it anyway, Mary. What's next for us?
So part 2 is Spotsylvania, obviously. For those who attend our roundtable, we will be having our roundtable next Wednesday evening. I think it's the 17th, 16th. Anyway, it's next Wednesday night at 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. Invites will be going out for that soon. If you've never attended before, Civil War Breakfast Club at gmail.com. We will send you an invite. It's just no set topic. We just nerd out about the Civil War. And then obviously Spotsylvania part 2, which will be episode 108, will be coming out next week. And then after that, we will be going back to the Western Theater to talk about the Battle of Pickett's Mills, which is happening, or not, it happens a few weeks after Spotsylvania. And it is probably one of the most violent battles to happen in the Atlanta campaign. We're doing some very violent battles, but the one thing that I've learned in my research recently and just like studying these battles and going out to the Western Theater and seeing them is that 1864 is a completely different beast in the Eastern and Western Theater compared to previous years of the Civil War. It is like, it's terrible. I mean, you read about what's happening at the Bloody Angle. We're going to talk about that next week, but Pickett's Mills as well is a horrific battle. So thank you to all of our listeners for sticking with us on this journey of so far 107 episodes. We are on to 108. And thank you, Darren, for being an awesome co-host.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And this is a good battle to talk about. Spotsylvania is certainly one of my favorites in the East. It's certainly up there. It'll be the second most violent. Well, it's the second battle of the Overland Campaign, but it's going to be that, like I said, 22 consecutive hours of longest sustained fighting. So we'll have a good time finishing this up to see what Lee can do to try to stem this tide by Barlow.
And wow, you said it was your pleasure to be doing those podcasts. Usually say the pleasure is all mine.
Sorry, the microphone didn't seem to go on. What were you saying? Anyway, everyone, thanks for listening. We appreciate it. Live on Saturday.
Yeah, Saturday at 10, this Saturday, 10 a.m., the 13th of May, we'll be doing our live via YouTube. So yeah, subscribe to our YouTube channel as well.
Yep, a lot of good things coming down the pike. So Mary, again, I will say, like always, the pleasure was all yours this time. I will say that. Anyhow, everybody have a great night. We'll talk to you on the other side.
See y'all later.
Peace out.
Bye.